everybody, Charles here in the LA Bread Lab. This week we're going to do something really fun and pretty quick. We're going to do British scones. Not scones, but scones. Scones are actually the parent of the American Southern biscuit. Light and flaky and tender, and really, really different from those big, cakey, triangular scones that we're used to having here in American coffee shops. We fell in love with scones when we were on vacation in the English countryside recently, and Lori and I were going around to all these beautiful old quaint villages, and in there we found tea shops, and afternoon tea really became a tradition for us. There was this one place in a town called Morton-on-Marsh where we actually got to meet the baker and get a few tips, and we're going to bring those tips home to you today and give you something that you can make with your family for a really nice afternoon treat or a breakfast or just a snack anytime. Let's get started. So scones don't take very long to prep at all. So before you even start measuring or anything, get your oven hot. Now we're going to start our oven at 500 degrees. And then as soon as we put the scones in, we're going to back it off to 425. We do this so that they have a nice heavy pulse of heat to get them going, but we want to have a slower heat for the rest of the bake so that they don't burn. Let's take a look at the recipe. This recipe makes 12 scones, so we're going to need 425 grams of flour, 14 grams of baking powder, 6 grams of salt, 66 grams of sugar, 114 grams or 1 stick of butter, that's unsalted butter, 240 grams of whole milk, and 110 grams of egg, which is conveniently 2 large USDA eggs. Now this is all-purpose flour, which is great because everybody can pretty much find that. If you want an extra tender scone, you can replace up to 1/3 of this with pastry flour. No more than that or it'll kind of sag all over the place, right? So what we're going to do is just going to put our dry ingredients in. Here's the sugar, here's the baking powder, and here's the salt. Super easy. And then we're just going to give that a stir to roughly mix it all together. All right, now we're going to deal with the wet ingredients. So we're going to take our milk, let's pour it in there, and our eggs. Now, sometimes eggs aren't exactly the proper weight. They're not exactly 55 grams. So when you weigh your eggs, if they're more or less by a couple of grams, make it up by adjusting the milk. Give it a good whisk. There you go. All right, now we're going to start by using our food processor to put everything together. Put these dry ingredients in first. And then we're just going to give it a quick pulse just to make sure it's nice and mixed. 2 or 3 is fine. And then we're going to take our butter. And you see I've cut a stick of butter into about 8 pieces. The butter is mildly softened, doesn't really matter that much. This food processor is going to really cut it up. You don't want it to be like super hard and cold. And now we're going to put that back on. Now we're going to be blending this more than you would blend pie crust. With pie crust you want, big pieces of fat to help make it super flaky. Here, we want it a lot more incorporated, so we're looking for something that looks like coarse sand. That's about 20 pulses. 2, 3, 4, 5, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Let's see what we got now. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And when you pull it out, squeeze it, and if it holds its shape and then crumbles, yep. See how easy that is? So now it's time to actually put our dough together. Before we do that, there's 1 or 2 things we need to do to get absolutely the best result. The first thing is to put a good amount of flour down on our board. This is a sticky dough, and while we don't want too much flour in it because we don't want it to get tough, we do need enough so that we can handle it properly. The second is we want to take 2 tablespoons of this liquid that we made, of the egg and milk, and put it aside so we can use it as a glaze on top so they can be nice and shiny. So now we're going to just take the dry ingredients and you just dump them in. This is what sometimes is called the muffin method, where you take all the dry ingredients and you put them together, and all the wet ingredients and you put them together, and then you put the 2 of them together in one go. And what we're trying to do here is just fold it together. We're looking for a pretty tender scone. So we don't want to really mix this too heavily, because if we do, we're going to develop the gluten like we're making a bread. We're not making a bread per se. We're making something that's a lot more like a cake. So folding is about going under and turning it over. Under and turning it over. We are going to need this, but before we do that, we want to be really gentle with it. See, it's starting to come together. You see there's this gushy area and there's this drier area. We want to move those together so that we even it out. All right, that's getting there. See, I'm never like stirring around. That's what you don't want to do. But you see how wet this is. It's pretty wet. Not really. So let's give a scrapey. Get it back in there. Nobody escapes. Nobody gets out. All right. So that's our wet dough. So we need to knead that now. So we're going to need a dough scraper. So let's turn it right out onto the flour. Get it all. Ugh. Now we have to knead this so that it's a little bit smoother. So I'm going to take a little flour and put it over the top. Dough scrape. Make sure it's loose. And this is about folding over. All right. So pat it, fold it. And if it sticks to your hands, don't worry, just get a little more flour on your hands. We are not trying to brutalize this, but it's, oh yeah. Fold it. Boy, it's really wet. But that is all right. Too dry and nobody's happy. And you can see that it's starting to get smooth. And now, got a little more flour. Is it sticky and icky? Yes. Yes, it is sticky and icky. But you know what? That's okay. No one died of sticky and icky. This dough scraper really helps you handle that. And you see how it's starting to come together a little more? Pat and fold. Pat and fold. A little more flour. If it's a really dry day, it'll take more flour. If it's a wet, humid day, it'll take less because the flour has taken up some water already. So it's all right that what you're doing is adding a little more flour than the recipe called for. What matters is how the dough looks. And as you can see, it's starting to get nice and pliable. And I think that's just about right. So now we're going to do that old familiar turning technique where we just turn and turn. And Now we're going to flatten it out into a rough circle. You want it to be about 9 inches across. You also don't want it to be stuck to the bottom of the board. So, there we go. That looks good. It's a little lumpy, right? It's not going to be as smooth and silky as a bread dough because we tried not to develop too much gluten. All right, so that's about 9 inches across and about 1 inch thick. So now it's time to cut our scones. I like to use these sort of professional style cutters. They come in all kinds of different sizes, from little tiny to big. I've already pulled the right one out. This is 2.5 inches across, which is the correct size for a British scone. That's what you're going to get when you go into a tea shop in the English countryside, a 2.5 inch scone. Could yours be larger? Absolutely. Could it be smaller? Sure. What's really important is that you use something that has a sharp edge. If you don't have a cutter like this, you could maybe use a tuna can that you cut the top off of and washed very thoroughly, because nobody wants tuna flavored scones. What's important is to cut straight down and not twist, and not drag the edge of the scone down while you cut it so that it has trouble rising. Now, once we cut the scones, we're going to move them over here to this pan. I've already lined this pan with essentially Silpat. This is a silicone pad to keep it from burning. You could also just use parchment paper, but I like these pads because they work really, really well in a hot oven. All right, so let's cut some scones. So just as some insurance, we're going to run our cutter through some flour before each cut, and that helps get a nice smooth cut. So get as close to the edge as you can, little waist as possible, and push straight down. No twisting. And lift it out. Then get yourself another, and down. And another, and down. We're going to get 8 out of this first round. All right. And now we just lift up and very carefully take our scone and move it to the tray. So we've got all these odds and ends now, so we got to get them together. Try not to overwork them, but right, we're going to do that same thing that we did before. Just a little bit of work. And what we need now is to get 4 more scones out of this to get a total of 8. Sorry, total of 12. No, can't count. All right, spread it out. And then just like we did before. 1, 2, it doesn't look like we're gonna get 4. What are we gonna get? We'll have some weird scone at the end. That happens, right? You're not a machine. Can't make it perfect every time. And here's one more. Kind of violate the rules and do a 3rd cut. This scone's probably going to be a little tougher than the others because it's been extra work, but you know what? We're going to get that last scone if it kills us. There it is. The weird scone. All right. A proper scone is shiny on top, and we're going to use this glaze that we saved from before to do that. Don't overdo it. You don't want it running down the sides and running onto the sheet because then it gets kind of burned and tastes like burned egg. And nobody really wants that. All right, so our scones are going to bake pretty quickly, in just about 10 to 12 minutes. So let's put them in. Ooh, hot. And then let's immediately drop the heat to 425. And that's going to give them a nice initial pulse, and then let them coast at a slightly lower temperature for a while. We're going to check them in 5 minutes and flip them so they bake evenly. All right, we're about 5 minutes in, and things are looking good. Our scones have risen nicely, and a crack is starting to form around the middle, which is the hallmark of the British scone, and it makes it really easy to break it in half to put your cream and jam on it. All right, we've turned it around so it bakes evenly. 5 to 6 more minutes. All right, that's 11 total minutes. Oh yeah, look at our babies. That is perfect. Golden brown, split. Even the weird one came out okay. Now these things are pretty delicate. You can see their bottoms have gotten kind of dark, which is fine, but we don't want to get them any darker. So we're going to just pull them off to a rack. Woo, they're hot. So hot, but I can already feel how delicate they are. So soft and fluffy. You know, these are so much like biscuits because the Scots and Northern English who settled the South brought this recipe with them. But here in America, sugar was really expensive. So they cut it out of the recipe, and that's why Southern biscuits aren't very sweet, but scones are. All right, the fun part, eating it. So what's great about a scone is that they practically split themselves. You see this beautiful crack? Means we did it right. All you got to do is pull, and it gently comes apart. Look how beautiful that is. Now, scones are eaten traditionally with two things: clotted or Devon or double cream, which is heavy cream that's been concentrated and thickened, and strawberry jam. Now, if you're in Cornwall, they insist that the jam goes on first. If you're in Devon, they insist that the cream goes on first. I think I like the Cornish way better. So I'm going to take some nice strawberry jam. Just put a little there. And then here's some clotted cream that I made myself by heating cream for about 12 hours at a very low temperature. And then chilling it down. And you can do that very easily yourself. You can use butter, you can use whipped cream, you can use mascarpone, you can use whipped cream if you like, but this is what's traditional. And I've got my cup of nice British tea. God, that's good. Duncan, you'll get some later. Pip, pip. They're a delectable little light Okay.
Get that out of your system?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
No, you didn't.
Shut up. All right, let's take a look at the recipe. This recipe makes 12 scones. All right, now we got to cut out our biscuits. They're not biscuits. So, just put the top on. Scones good!